Good afternoon and welcome to CAD-1, Brian Mackey Consulting's joint presentation on detailing in Revit. This is part 3 of this presentation, and joining me today, I'm Stan Henne with CAD-1, and joining me today is Brian Mackey of Brian Mackey Consulting. And Brian has become rather famous for many things in the Revit world, but certainly his detailing has garnered a lot of attention. So Brian, we welcome you back for the third part of this. These are being recorded. Unlike Revit Radio, this is being recorded, and we will be posting this third episode on our YouTube channel here in the next few days, and you can see part 1 and 2 and review them on our YouTube channel as well. So with that, we've got our little housekeeping screen here. Most of you have been on a GoToMeeting at this point, so you know pretty much all of it. If you want to move the console in, you can hit the orange arrow and move it out of your way. Raising your hand, we're never really too sure what that's for actually, but and most importantly, if you need to ask a question, you can certainly do that, and we will try to answer that as close to in context as we can. Brian, do you have any other slides or things you want to talk about before we kind of launch into the program?
Before I do, just one of the big things is if you ask a question, just try to ask it while we're doing it. It's much easier to answer those questions in context than it is to try to come back and, oh yeah, an hour ago we talked about this. So we have no problem you chiming in with questions. If we know we're going to be getting to that, we might pause on your question. So also don't freak out if your question doesn't get answered right away. So with that said, this is part 3 in the Revit detailing series. We have recorded these in the past. They've been going on for the last couple of years, so your slight changes for each year and new things we might actually have inside of there. So we'll give a little bit of a brief overview of what we covered in the past, and then this session is going to be mostly about creating some more detail components using nested details, as well as possibly getting into creating some standard detail assemblies. What I mean by that is using the detail components, creating your typical detail, but possibly maybe doing some constraints. So as the objects start changing and updating, we can get that set up, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more familiaric on that scenario for you. So with that said, it looks like we've got a great group of people. Again, like we said, if there's any questions, go ahead and jump in and ask those questions as we're going through. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into my little detail file. This has advanced a little bit over the years. This file was started way back in the day. But I've been readjusting, reevaluating some of the things as we go through and get into it. So what we have gotten into is we have went through and talked a little bit, probably this is my typical standard detail. It's about the only thing I can think of that had structure and architecture going with it. I do apologize, there's no MEP inside of this, as somebody pointed out occasionally. So what I'll go through is, what you've seen is I've got the standard detail, and this has no relationship to the 3D model. I do have some versions where there's a 3D model aspect of it, but a lot of this is just all standard details. And depending on if your company does it with tagging, so you're using more of a text-based scenario, or if you're using a Keynote scenario, the difference is going to be the same for family creation. And in the past, what you've seen me do, I'm a personal fan of the tags. I'm going to go back to the tag version. But what you've seen in the past is every single thing inside of here is a detail component. In session 2, we talked a little bit about these line-based objects, and even though this looks like a line, it's still a detail item. So A, I can get the line weight, but more importantly, B, I can tag that object. So as I come in here and get this object, you can see that the text value is highlighted because that's not text, it's a tag associated to it. So that's kind of one of the big things we've done. And so what I want to show today is nested details. How to create those details, more getting into the nested detail. And I'm going to start off with one of them is just a simple brick with a weep, because this one's actually using a shared component. And the other family I'm just going to talk about is the rebar, which is just using a nested detail, but it's not a nested shared detail. This is kind of one of the things I would go into. It's kind of a little bit brick, might be structural, architectural, rebar, again, could be architectural, structural, depending where you're at. And if we want to, we can possibly get into some of the other ones. So session 2, we did cover line-based, creating the gypsum board family. This one, we're going to get more into the nested details. So one of the big things for me that I talk about is any family you're going to go start creating. It's real important to sit down and see what your plan of attack is going to be. But more importantly, it's kind of a big deal to go through and start with your template. So if I come back over here to Revit and I'm going to go do a new family, one of the big things for me is I very rarely use the out-of-the-box detail item families, because for me, when I start getting into this, I want to make sure I'm using my hatch patterns, I'm using my line styles. Heck, I might even happen to already have parameters built in that I'm going to be used for scheduling, tagging, especially in 14, since now we can schedule detail items, shared parameters for scheduling type scenarios. So most of the time you won't see me use the detail item if I'm creating this. I am going to use the out of the box, so there's no craziness going on for anybody here. But we'll just start with the detail item, in this case, family. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab open on this one. And what you'll see might be a little bit different than if I start with this and start with my own. My own, I always set my dimension styles up the way I want to. I change the accuracy of the model, just some things in there. But the bigger thing is, I'm going to tab back to my project, is when I start looking at these objects and I go into visibility graphics, you're going to see that under detail items, I have my own line weights inside of here. And that's kind of one of the big things and why I say start with not the out of the box, but something customized to your company. Use those line weights how you have them set up. Because, we've got heavy, light, medium out of the box. I really don't know what that means. What is heavy? What is light? What is medium? I'm more of an analytical type person. Hey, I want to know exactly what pin I'm using. I want to know if that's a pin 10. Is it a pin 5 hidden? Is it a pin 5 center? What do you do? So get those set up to match your company standards. I'm not going to cover too much of this. I'll show you this a little bit here, but I'm not going to start with one so you guys aren't saying, ooh, look, he's emerald. I'm going to show you how to get that stuff created. So back in that family, if I was to do this and I'm starting to use pin 1, pin 2, pin 3, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating my own object styles. So I'm going to come down here and say I'm going to go to my Manage tab, Object Styles, and rather than just using the heavy, the hidden, the medium, the light, what I always do is I just simply delete those out of there. I don't want my template to have heavy, medium, and light lines in there. I want those just to be gone. They don't match my company standards. I don't want them in there. I could have renamed them, but I just want to show you how to create it from scratch. So if this is me getting to mine, I'm going to go start creating new subcategories. And maybe I want to come in here and say, hey, we're using a pin of a 1. Well, that's going to use pin 1. Then I'll go through and do pin 02, and maybe this is going to be pin 2. So for me, it's a matter of going through and setting all of this up in my template. Oops, let me rename that one. I don't have a pin 0. Also pin 3, using line weight 3. So get this set up in your template. I'm always preaching about having family templates. I'm pretty in-depth in project templates, but I think family templates are as critical. So go through, you get that all set up. We'll just throw a couple more in here. 05, 04, and 05. And pound 05. So whatever your standard may be, go through and set those up. And now, oops, got that arrow down. There we go. So now I've got those line weights to use. And so inside of families in Revit, you don't actually have line types or line weights. It's going to be object styles. Object styles and detail families transfer over to be line weights, etc. So as you guys have all seen when I start talking about families, okay. I am not able to select the reference plane. Oh, because it's a pinned object. My last session I was getting rid of being able to select pinned element. So here I'm going to select these reference planes in here. You're going to see that reference planes truly are the heart and soul. And if we do start sitting here thinking about what we're going to do is come in here and basically create this brick component. I'm going to go ahead and edit this family real quick so you can see what's going on. Then inside this brick component, I need to think about where's my insertion point going to be. Last session we talked about line-based families, and you're pretty much fixed for the insertion point on those, but where do you want that insertion point to be? What are you going to start doing inside of here? So in this case, you can kind of see if I zoom out on this, I've got a few reference planes in here extracting what's going to happen, and I'm going to go through and set that up. So this is the family we're creating. So to start with, I just need to create the brick. Okay, I have too many views open right now. Let's close some of these views. Okay, so I'm in this family. I'm going to create the brick, and I want the insertion point to be at the lower left corner. So the reference planes out of here might be labeled as center, front, back, center, left, right, things like that. What I'm going to do is start renaming this. If I know this is going to be the bottom of the family, it's completely okay to rename these to be the bottom of the family, to be a new name, reference, etc. And it's also pretty critical to come down here and change the is reference. I'm going to say that's the bottom. I'm going to need another reference plane up above that's going to be the top. Okay, I'm going to try this again. Yeah, that's the scope box. I keep misclicking here. So that's going to be the top, and it's going to be my top reference plane. And then I'll probably come in here and start dealing with, I'm going to have that mortar joint, etc. inside of this. So I'll go ahead and grab this one. I'll call it the mortar. And maybe I want this just simply a weak reference, so it's not a named reference for snapping purposes, as we've discussed in the last session. So I'm also going to need another reference plane in the front to be the front, and we'll just draw one over here. We'll grab this one and say it's going to be the right. Man, my fingers are not working for me. And then I'm going to grab this one over here and say this one is going to be the left. Okay? So even though you might be calling this the front of the detail component, in the Revit world, this really needs to be the left and this needs to be the right. In the detail item world, this can be the top or the front, the bottom or the back. So in my case, I'm going to keep the left and the right for purposes in the Revit world. So once this is done, this is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead now and start doing my filled regions. So I'm going to go do a filled region. I'm going to choose the filled region that I want. Again, come up with your naming standards even on your filled regions. For me, if you look into my template, I don't say brick, I don't say block, I don't say metal. I say it's crosshatch 45, it's diagonal 45, it's diagonal 135. I'm a little bit more descriptive because so many times I go work with clients, they've got 15 fill patterns that do the same thing simply because somebody called that fill pattern brick. Well, it's crosshatch lines or diagonal lines or whatever it may be. So I'm going to draw my boundary. I'm going to padlock it to the 4 reference planes, and what you're going to see I forgot to do is I forgot to change what line weight am I using for this. So for me, this is kind of a section through something. It should be a line weight of 3. Turn my thin lines off so we get a little bit more of an effect on that. Hit finish, and now you can see, very simple, I've created that filled region, that detail component like we'd want it to be. But if I go back and look at my brick that's there, you can kind of see there's also this mortar, but the mortar in my mind is its own nested family. The brick weep is not just an X, it's its own nested family. And there's a couple of reasons why I would do this. This mortar component I have used for CMU, I've used it for my tile grout. I've basically taken this mortar family, done a few save ases, and I've used it for probably 15 or 20 families. Rather than having to constantly go in and figure out the arc and draw the lines, in my scenario it makes much more sense to do with this as a nested family. You're also going to see that the nested line for the weep vent, as I'm calling it, this is also nested. And the big reason why this family is nested is since it's nested, I wanted to be able to tag that. So as you might have saw in my last session or two, that when I come through and do this, I can tag nested families as long as they've been shared with in a project with the tab key. So if I really want to tag that out, I can get to that by using the tab key, and you'll see it's going to come in here and say, hey, there's my weep vent. So depending on if you want to tag it in the project or if you just simply want it because ease of use, I'm going to go through and create nested families for that information. So we're sitting here in this case, that's pretty much all I'm going to do in this family. What I need to do is start another new family. And rather than adding the new line types, I'm just going to save this family real quick. I'm just going to throw this in here and just call this my brick. And then with that said, oh, actually, I should probably put some parameters in here first to make my life easy.
You probably should.
So I'll go ahead and put the parameters in there first. So I've got the reference planes. I've got that in there. I kind of skipped over the whole parameter thing. My apologies. So I'm going to go start doing some dimensions. All right, there's going to be a dimension. We're going to have a dimension here. Depending on how you wanted to do this, you might want to do an overall dimension. You might want to do a dimension on the individual thing. One thing that drives me crazy with the out-of-the-box template is the fact that I'm rounding this thing. And I also hate the fact that it's in feet and inches. I really don't need feet on something that's never going to get over 3 inches tall. So kind of coming in here, setting this up, right? Now I'm going to grab this. I'm going to add a parameter. It's going to be my mortar. We'll just call it mortar size. You can call it mortar height, whatever is going to work for you. And we're just going to call this one brick height. So depending on how you want to do this, I do this for several different clients. And some of them want the overall brick height to include the mortar. Some of them don't. Whatever you're looking for. If you come back in here and look at this one, I did a joint and then the height. You could do the height overall if you wanted to, whatever you completely want to be doing on that. So I've got those parameterized. I'm going to obviously need to do a dimension for the depth of the brick too. So we'll go ahead and grab this one. We'll add a parameter. We'll call it brick depth. Okay. So now those are created. I always like to flex the model, as I'm sure anybody who's ever taken any sort of Revit session, everybody's saying, hey, flex the model, flex the model. Go ahead and do that. And you'll also notice that I'm not going to use the inch mark when I'm doing all of this, because what's great about setting your project or your families up to fractional inches as opposed to feet and inches, the nice part about this is you can just come in and, oops, as long as you're not using a plus symbol, you can just type in the value without needing to put the inch mark. So you can set it up, make sure it's going to flex, do what it needs to do. You're getting the hatch pattern in there. I'm going to change my scale to be something a little bit closer to see more of the correct line weights and hatch. Really starting to get that to look kind of like this one's doing. So I got my 2 1/4 height, I've got my depth, etc. Oops, on tab. Okay, I'm just coming through here and playing with this. You know, I know my brick depth was wrong, but I'm just flexing it out, making sure it's all going to start doing what it needs to do. Okay, and I know I have some clients that like to see the dashes for the holes. You could put all that in there, whatever you feel you need to. I'm going to save this. And just so I don't have to go recreate some of those values, I'm just simply going to do a save as. I'm going to save this as a family. I'm just going to call this one my mortar. Okay, I can delete that filled region, and now I'm going to come in here and do another filled region inside of here. So if you start looking at this, same scenario, I've got my little mortar family. Naming conventions does become huge. I'm being pretty basic on my naming right now for speed purposes. So you can see this one's got its own family, it's got its own little mortar, and depending on how you want to do this, if you go into your family, you might see that, hey, I've got, you know, radiuses in there, I've got parameters for the radius, whatever you want to do, you can make it stagnant. If you need a great reference for how to do crazy arcs in families, Paul Aubin's new book, Renaissance in Revit, has some great formulas and tools and utilities to go through and set this up. So you can kind of see it's not that big of a deal. I've got my joint height, I've got my width, and I've got a center line in there. So we'll go back to my saved as family. I don't need the brick height parameter in there. I am going to want a reference plane to the center, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this one down. I'm going to do a dimension string and pull these dimensions in a little bit. Place this dimension string. I'm going to go ahead and equalize that. We'll pull those in so I'm not scrolling on you guys, making you dizzy during this recording or live session, right? So I've got that equal. So now it's just basically going in and doing a filled region. I'm not going to parameterize this as bad as the other one was for speed purposes. I'm just going to go do another filled region. I'm going to choose the one I want. I guess we'll just choose the gypsum. Choosing the line weights I want again on this, and then just going through and drawing what I needed to do in here. So I'm going to go ahead and model this. Now, in this case where I'm going to have an arc, I need this line to be constrained at its endpoints to the length here. So like you saw in the gypsum one I did in session 2, I need to make sure that I'm aligning the endpoints to that object. So I will draw another line here. And I've always wondered in Revit why sometimes it gives you the padlock and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not really sure why I sometimes get the padlocks on them and other times I don't. So I'm going to hit the lock. And now I'm going to come in and give myself a very simple arc on each end. You could parameterize the arc. You can take that to the extreme. I'm not going to worry about it. It's going to do pretty simple, basic family. So now that this family's been created, I've got the brick depth, I've got the mortar size, etc. What you're going to see for nested families is this little checkbox over here that says shared. And what that shared checkbox allows you to do is to either schedule this object independently or to tag that object once it's been loaded into the project. So if you're the type of firm, and I worked for an architectural firm way back in the day, that we would actually tag out or call out the different types of mortar joints. Hey, maybe we want a knife joint, one bevel joint, whatever you're looking for there. You could create several different families, one that's got the tool joint, one that's a knife joint, a bevel joint, whatever you might be doing, and you can actually swap out families inside of the project. So if you wanted just an arc joint, a tool joint, make that shared, then you'd be able to swap them out if you set the family up that way and tag it accordingly. So this is kind of one of the nice features of doing shared families as well, is you can also swap out from one type to the next. So if anybody ever knows me, before I save anything, I always turn off the reference planes, and then I'm going to save this, and I'm simply going to load this back into my new family. Oh, I don't have that family open because I did a save as. I'm going to go open up my little brick family real quick. Okay, so now that the family's open, we're going to go ahead and load this into my brick family. Okay, I'm just going to randomly place this. I don't ever try to place these families where they should be. I just randomly place them because I like to set up the constraints before I start aligning and locking where they need to go. So with this mortar joint set inside of here, I'm going to want this to adjust as the brick depth changes, as the thickness changes. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by mapping the associated parameters. So when you nest a family into another family, you're going to see these little squares. I used to call them the secret hidden buttons because they never had a name. But now what I can do is come in here and say, ooh, that mortar size, I need to associate that family parameter with the parameter that's inside the nest. I want to take this brick depth parameter and associate it to the brick depth parameter that's inside of here. What you'll see happens after that is if I now come in here and start playing with that brick depth, oops, make that 6 inches, it's going to adjust this as that starts to adjust. So I'm not aligning and locking the left and the right and any of the craziness there. I'm mapping or associating all of the parameters in that family that need to get mapped across. If you wanted to, you could map the brick height. Don't have to, but if you had a parameter and there was a formula, you could map that one as well. I probably should have removed it, but that's okay. So once you get all of that mapped, it's now associating or aligning and locking its insertion point to where you need it to be in this family. And to do that, it's just like anything else, we're going to use the align command. So I'm going to grab my align command. I'm going to grab this left reference plane and align and lock it to the left. And I'm going to grab this bottom reference plane and align and lock it to the bottom. I'm again going to go flex to make sure that if anything changes, it's going to move up and down. And if I change my mortar size, it's going to update accordingly. So I've got that all parameters mapped, I've got it aligned and locked, and now I have that set up inside of there. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. We're now done with the mortar family, so I'm going to close it. Done with the other mortar family from my example file. So now what I'm looking for is to do this brick weep vent. So maybe I wanted to come through here and have this weep hole inside of here. So very similar thing, I need to go create another family. I need to close some of those. So once this is done, I'm going to save it. I'm just going to go ahead and do a save as. Save it as my weep vent. I can delete out the nested family in this case because I don't need that nested family. We're going to delete that mortar family. Yes, you can remove it. And I'm going to delete my filled region. Okay? So now inside of this is going to be a pretty easy family. It's just going to simply be a couple lines. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my lines. I'm going to make these lines probably like a line 5 so they're pretty apparent. I'm just going to go from intersection to intersection. And the other intersection to the other intersection. And then, of course, doing my align and lock. And I am aligning and locking the endpoints, so I'm waiting to make sure that I see that little dot come up as opposed to it highlighting the entire line. So I want to make sure it's giving me the little dot. In old releases of Revit, it was pretty critical. You actually had to hit the tab key 500 times. And you sometimes still do have to hit the tab key, but in 13 and 14 I've been noticing it's pretty smooth and it just automatically finds those endpoints. So again, going to go flex this, make sure it's going to work. We'll make that 2 inches. We'll make the height 3 inches. We'll hit apply, so it's adjusting accordingly. Now, the big thing about this is I want to take this family and I want to make it shared. That's going to allow me to now tag properties of this family inside of the project. So if I make this shared, I'm going to want to be able to tag the type comments. That's how I have it set up. So what I'm going to do inside of here is now come into this nested family and add information on type comments. So my weep vent. Okay. The other thing that you're going to see is if I were to load this shared family into my brick family, these parameters will not be able to be mapped because they are type-based parameters. The only way to map parameters are instance-based. So what I'm going to have to do is modify Type comments. Oh, I did it in the formula. Oops. I don't know why I did it there. Should have been over here and type comments, so we vent. So what I'm going to do in here is select these and modify this to be an instance-based parameter. So modify all of these, make them instance-based. You can also do this on the screen if you wanted to. If you don't want to go to family types and change it, if I come over here and grab that mortar size, I can just simply check this instance checkbox up here. Makes it a little bit easier if you've got multiple parameters to do. You can do it that way as well. Okay, so I should be done with this. So I'm going to go turn off all my parameters. And now I'm going to do a save as. I already did save it, so I'm going to save it. And I'm going to load this into the file. It's not open, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the brick again. And let me load this in to my brick family. So the same thing is going to be true. I'm just going to randomly place this off to the side, and then even though those are instance parameters, and I see a lot of people trying to do this and padlock it, I'm not going to do that. I'm still going to do my map the parameter. So I'm going to take that brick height and map it to brick height. I grab brick depth. So map brick depth to brick depth. I'll take brick height and map it to brick height. And again, I'm not really using it, but I can map the mortar size just so it's all consistent. You'll also notice that if you can tell that a family has had parameters mapped because the triangular shape handles become dots. And they're a dot because they're now a grip that moves, not a grip that stretches. So the programmers even said, hey, if we have a shape handle of something that's being mapped, and I'll just go unmap the mortar size, I'm going to leave it a triangle because you're not being controlled by something in the family. As you see, I got the shape handle grips here. But if you map that family or that parameter, you all of a sudden end up with dots. So it is kind of a nice little thing. If you're not sure your instance-based parameters were mapped or not, you can tell simply because of what you've got going on with those grips changing out. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and align this. Again, I'm going to go to the left and align it to my left and padlock. And I'll go to the bottom and align it to the bottom and padlock. Okay? So now that that's all set up, this has been shared, I'll be able to tag it. Maybe what I want to be able to do is turn this off and on independently because I don't want every single brick to have a weep vent. I want to have one brick family that will let me accomplish everything I need to accomplish. So what I'm going to do is select it, and I'm going to change its visibility parameter out that makes this whole family visible or not visible. So I'm going to select that visible parameter. I'm going to hit the Associate Family Parameter button. I'm going to create a parameter called Weep. It's a yes/no parameter. I like to group those under visibility or possibly graphics, depending on what you're looking for. And I like to make it instance-based. So I'll say OK. I'll say OK. All right, so now if we compare this to my other family, all right, I've got the X in there. Oh, that X was a hidden line type. Maybe I'll need to go back and change that. I've got the mortar grip, and I've got all the parameters I need to have inside of there. Yep, so now we're good. Making sure I had all the same properties. So with that said, I'm just going to go ahead and load this into my project. We'll load it into our details file. We'll just go ahead and plop this off here over to the side. It looks a little bit different. And now I should be able to come in here and do my tag by category. I forgot to set up a property for the unit masonry, but you'll also see that if I tab, I can now get, we'll do a free end leader here. If I do a tab, I can get to the weep vent and tag that weep vent independently. And if I come back to this brick and say turn off the weep, it's going to get not only rid of the weep, but it's also going to remove the tag form. So getting that nested family in there allows you to possibly tag it, but it also speeds up the process of, man, I don't have to create that mortar for the CMU. I don't have to create that mortar for the tile. I don't have to keep recreating that extrusion. I can go through and just start nesting it. So don't see any questions so far, so hopefully that's making sense to everybody. So the other one I wanted to get into for mapping purposes, I'm just going to probably do this rebar section tool. And the reason I want to get into this is not only is this nesting in a family, but it's also using a separate shared parameter so I can tag it out, and that shared parameter is truly controlling a variable inside the family. So if I were to select that family and say I don't want that spacing at 16 inches, I want it at a foot, not only does it update the rebar inside the family, it's also updating my tag information as well. So I'm going to go ahead and basically create a similar feature to this. And for this one, I am going to start with one of my templates just because I don't really want to go through and start this all up. So I'm going to go ahead and say new family. I'm going to browse to my little data set that I had for RTC North America. Detailing session. Are they actually only in a zip file? Really? Let me check real quick. I thought I had it open. See, Brian Mackey. I really thought that's where it was. Yeah. Oh, did I go to the wrong year? RC 2013, North America. Is that a zip file and I just didn't notice this? Oh, detailing. Oh, because this is not a template. It's an actual family. So I started with a family, not a template. So I said file new family, and it's not saying it because it's not a template file. So we're actually going to start from a family in here because I had some parameters already set. So we're going to go open this little family starting point. So those of you who came in last detailing session and the detailing part 2, you're going to see we created a line-based family. And this line-based family is not much different than a lot of this. It is line-based, so it does have the original left, which I always rename to start, has the original end, which I always rename to end, and then I started adding some other parameters in here. So for this family, what you'll see inside of there is I pick this family. You can see its original pick point is back here at the edge of the footing, and what I always add in there is a cover distance. So I'd like to add parameters in here, so rather than trying to eyeball 3 inches away, I try to add those parameters in there so a user getting inside of there can come in and say, oh, let me just pick from end to end, maybe have it stretch with that object, and then therefore go through and get it set up. So we're going to use that same example back over here. So a lot of that's been set up. I'm done with this file. Close some of these files out so when I tab, you guys don't see so much of them. Close this one out. Okay, so now we're back to my little family. So what I've done is I've created a rebar section family. Now, like I said, this is not the same rebar section family that I use for individual pieces of rebar. And the reason it's not is because I just come up with a size called 0, 0, because I'm going to do all of the mapping on this family inside of here. I'm not sharing this. I don't need to tag the individual rebar. What I'm actually doing for this family is going into those family types and mapping all of them. But I don't need to say there's like a size 6, a size 4, a size 9, because I'm not doing it that way. I'm actually mapping this size 6, which then controls the radius and the comments on that object. So for me, in this scenario, this is a very simple, just filled region with reference planes on the right, left, front, back. So pretty much the exact same thing we did with brick, but as opposed to drawing a square, I drew a circle. It's really the only difference on here, and as opposed to using the brick fill pattern, I use the black fill pattern. Really the only difference. You'll see if I come over here, it's got the radius, diameter set up, and I guess this was created long ago. Now in 13 and 14 we can do a diameter parameter on the circle, but so it's a very simple family, not a whole lot going on with it. But what I wanted to do inside of here is now place that family, and with that family placed, I am going to have to come in here and map that parameter. So I'm going to take this number 6 size and map it in my host family that says the rebar size. I'll say OK. So now what you'll see is if I come back up here to my rebar size, minimize this up a little bit, if I change that from a size 6 to a size 10, not a size 0, that doesn't exist, boom, it's going to go through and set it up. So the way this is being controlled is I give my users a size value, and then down here there's this extremely large if statement. If the size is less than 9, it's the size times divided by 1/16. So there's a formula that breaks it down depending on what the user says for size, and since everything less than a size 9 is divided by 1/16, but anything greater than a size 9 is a given value. It's not necessarily a formula. I went through and set that all up inside of there. So if you really start getting here and you go all the way to the end, you're going to see it's a very long, hey, if all these sizes exist. I also put an if statement in there at the very end. If you create a size that doesn't exist, so let's say you want a size 22, it's going to make it 3/16 of an inch round, which makes it pretty apparent that you don't have a correct size. So it's all I'm really doing in here is just you map that size, you give it a value of 10, there's a formula controlling that. Okay? So what I'm going to do that's a little bit different is what I want to do is come in here and just set this up for either a spacing or a quantity depending on what you want. In order to do that, I'm going to array my rebar. I'm going to go change that size to be a little bit bigger than a 22. Just because, oops, that's not a 10. I miskeyed that. So like a size 10, just so it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to take that size, that rebar, and I'm going to simply grab an array tool. Now, depending on how you want this set up, you want it by maximum spacing, a fixed quantity. When you do your array, it's going to be dependent, are you doing a move to second or a move to last? So this is dependent on your office, how you're doing it. A lot of the firms I work with, we do a move to second, and it does them all 6 inches apart, and if at the end I have one 1 inch away, so be it I have one 1 inch away. Some firms I deal with, they say maximum spacing, and so if we make that maximum spacing value 6 inches, it'll equally divide it up. So however you want to do it, I'm going to do this more on the maximum spacing side of things. So I'm going to say give me an array and do a move to last. And what this move to last means is pick your first point, pick your last point, and I will fill in between however many you do. So if I start changing this to be 4, the start and the end stay in the exact same location, and I add in between. Once that array has been created, I want to be able to justify the quantity. So I'm going to grab the array. So it's really weird. You have to grab one of the array components. Then I'm going to come up here and grab this array family, and I can come through here and select this array and then parameterize this. So I got this parameterized. I'm going to come in here and say I want to go do that by the rebar quantity. So you can see it automatically changed it. It's now been parameterized. Let me try that again. It's got the label just like you would a dimension of rebar quantity. Okay? What you'll see that's controlling is if I come up here to rebar quantity, there's a formula calculating how many it's going to be. So you'll see in here I didn't say spacing. I called it spacing max because I want somebody to say, hey, it's 1 foot. And then my formula is saying, hey, let's take that formula or that spacing max, divide it by this, and give us a nice even round number. So once that's created, since this is an array, I need to align and lock the first one as well as the end one to their constraints. And since this was a move to last, that's why I'm aligning the last one. I also want those to be off of the edge here, so I'm going to align that first one as well as the last one to that edge. Okay? A lot of people come in here and ask me, well, if the size is being controlled by the nested family, why do you have that bottom reference plane? Why do you have that center reference plane? The reason I have those reference planes in there is so when somebody's actually doing the modeling, they can, or I should say detailing, they can snap to either edge of that. Had I not included the center or this edge reference plane, when you loaded that in, you wouldn't be able to align, lock, dimension to either side. So that's really the reason why I have those in there. They're not controlling the nested family at all. They're just there for ease of use once loaded into a project. Okay? So that said, of course, we're going to come in here and flex this. Let's go change the length to be something like 3 feet. Let's hit the apply button. You can see it adjusted. It still gave me 5. What if we go change it to be 3 feet with the apply button? It's changed the quantity. Just going through and playing with a few of the values, changing the rebar size out, which I probably broke. What was the old one on? Probably broke one of those by playing with size 6. Yeah, so this should be size 6. So making sure it's all working and getting set up inside of there. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to show on this, since this was our file was already set up, and I did pull Emerald a little bit on this one, is that I do have this rebar spacing and this rebar size. If I modify these are shared parameters. And the reason I made the size and the spacing, I think the quantity as well, shared parameters, is because I wanted to be able to tag those. So length isn't a shared, well, length is the out-of-the-box parameter, but if I come in here and grab cover start, cover end, I was never going to tag that information. I might mention it, but I was never going to tag that. So I just made those all family parameters. So for the spacing, max spacing, our rebar quantity and rebar and size, I definitely made all of those shared parameters. So therefore, once this is all said and done, I can come in and get this set up. It's going to then be able to be taggable. So I'm just going to say OK to this. We're just going to go ahead and load this into our project. You'll see that now I can just come here and say, hey, I want to start right here. I want to come over right here. And boom, there's my rebar. I can pick on this, change the cover on the start. Maybe we want that to be 3 inches. Hit a negative first, not after, and the cover end maybe wants to be 3 inches. And you can see it's moving it in. I want to change the size. Let's go make it a size 13. Oh, wait, that's crazy. Nothing happened. There's my size 14. So I can start coming through here and doing this, setting this up, move it up my 3 inches, whatever I need to do, but you can really start to see that that's in there. Now, if I just go tag this family, all I'm going to get is whatever was in the comments. So in this case, when I start looking at this and I go back to that family, I'm only right now tagging what is in my type comments, the number 6 bar, the number 14 bar, whatever it might be. So that tag is not picking up, well, how does this say number 6 at 1 inches on center, etc. I've created a custom tag for this. And I'll go through and do this one from scratch. So if you look at this tag and we look at the label, it's pulling out those 3 shared parameters, or 2 shared parameters, I should say. It's pulling out the size, it's pulling out the maximum spacing. If I wanted to, I could also pull out the quantity. So depending on how you're doing it, if you want quantity and size and spacing, feel free to do that. But for me, it's just, okay, this is what I wanted to do. So in order to do this, we're going to close this out. Just another new family. So file, new family. We're going to do just an annotation, and we're going to do a generic tag. And then what this little red box is telling you on your tag family is to come up to your family types, your family categories, and tell it what category you're going to be tagging. In this case, we're going to tag detail items. It's okay. You're then going to go put a label down. Choose the height, font, whatever you're going to want for your label. I'll leave that up to your company standards. And then you're going to start choosing which parameters you want to be using. The problem is those shared parameters don't exist. So we need to go browse to our shared parameter file. So it's using the lead parameters, so I need to go browse to my shared parameter file. So we'll open up my shared parameter file, and I believe under my structure, roll rebar, I have size, maximum spacing, and quantity. So I'm going to need to go choose under my structural rebar the size, add that over, and then we're going to go ahead and add another shared parameter under my structural rebar to be my quantity or spacing, whatever you want it to be, and add that over there. So what is nice about this is you're going to see my size is actually just a number, so I can put like the number sign in front of it. If I'm doing quantity, I could then say, you know, it's going to have a parentheses before and a parentheses after. So I can give it a, or you might do brackets, depending if you do brackets or parentheses. I forget which, every firm is different. So you can do brackets or parentheses, and you just simply do those as a prefix and a suffix. And so now you can see I'm coming in here and saying size and quantity. I don't like it center justified, so I'm going to go ahead and make mine left justified. And I'm going to nudge it over closer to where the beginning of that family is. I'll go ahead and load this into my project. Should probably save it, give it a name. But now I can come in here and swap this tag out for my family 6 tag. And now there's my number 14, and there's 3 of those. If you decide you want the spacing of the number 3 at the beginning, 3 number 14s at whatever, just go back and edit your label. So maybe I wanted the rebar size or the rebar quantity ahead of the size, and then I also want to add the shared parameter of maximum spacing. Add that over, we'll add a little @ symbol, say OK, load it into the project, overwrite that existing version. So there's 3 number 14s at 1 foot on center. Beauty of this, I can say, what the heck was I thinking? Those shouldn't have been 1 foot on center. Those should have been 14 inches. That's a common value. And it's going to update the spacing if it needs to. We'll make it something bigger. And not only does it update the spacing, it updates the quantity in both the tag as well as the object. Looks like I'm trying to roll that, but okay. So that's another great reason on why you might come in here and start setting up nested families. Is you're going to be using that one family to be an array. If you do an array, you pretty much have to nest a family. I've never had consistent success doing an array off of an extrusion or something built into the family. Have it work sometimes, not work other times. I've never had that consistency when trying to do an array inside of the family. So for me, an array means a nest. Okay? So that said, last thing I said we were going to get into is getting into creating standard details assemblies. And really all I mean by that is once you start getting a standard detail like this, what happens if somebody comes back and says, man, I don't want this footing to be 2'6", I want it to be 3 feet. Well, you adjust that, and now all of a sudden I've got to update my rebar, set some things like that. So all that I'm really talking about in creating standard assemblies is to start adding some parameters to things. So I've already got this dimension of 1.5" clear on here. Maybe I need to padlock that. I've already got this dimension of 1.5" clear. Maybe I need to padlock that. And what that's going to start doing for me is if I come in here now and say that's going to be 3 feet, no, I broke it. It's not liking that. So usually that works for me. And this is a scenario, so maybe, that's not going to be what I want. Sorry, I did the wrong thing. So it's just starting to add these constraints. I forgot that I actually have this point come over to here. So if you're going to start doing this, what I'm going to do is grab my align command. I'm going to grab the edge of that foundation, and then pick the edge of that piece of rebar and lock it. Grab the edge of the foundation over here, pick the edge of that rebar and lock it. The reason locking my dimension didn't work is that's actually controlling a parameter in the family, and Revit's going to say, I can't do that. So now if I come in here and grab this, hopefully, notice how that piece of rebar stretched. So if I want to do the same thing, and this is where it really starts coming in and gets a little bit tedious, I can align this piece of rebar and lock it, and this piece of rebar over here, making sure I'm getting the edge of my foundation, and lock it. And it's really a matter of starting to go through and do that. Now here, I can change the 3" clear. I can padlock that. So now if somebody comes in and says, oh, I don't want the 12" footing, we'll duplicate. I want an 18" footing. And we'll change the value to be 18 inches. And we'll change the tag to be 18 inches and say, okay. And boom, oh, the 3" clear went. But what didn't go? All the rest of these. So this is one of those things that as you start doing this, just like creating a family, if you're saying, hey, I've got standard detail items, I've got standard, etc., and you're starting to set up some constraints in this, you're also going to have to be doing some of the flexing as well. Let's go ahead and do that. Maybe I'm going to want these to move with it. So let me flex, let me padlock that. It's just going through and basically flexing out the nest or the family, the detail, just like you would the other one. So let me come back and change that from an 18" to a 12". Okay, look at that. There it goes. If you're sitting there thinking on something like this, well, gee, this always wants to be 1.5" clear. I don't want that to move. Maybe I need to padlock that. And in some cases, you might need to add another dimension. It looks like that dimension is going to this piece of rebar. So I'm going to have to add another dimension from here to this one, padlock that. Let me unpadlock that and make it 1.5" first. So let me pull this up. Come on, grab that. Where is my grip? My grip should be floating like right here. Am I missing this? Okay. So we'll just leave it at that and we'll padlock it for now. I don't know why I'm missing a grip there. So again, then maybe I don't want to see that dimension, so I can delete a constrained dimension and tell Revit to keep the constraints on there. So hopefully, coming back, changing this to 18 inches, seeing if this will grow down, but it was dimensioned to the stud. Oops, I dimensioned it to the wrong thing because now what I successfully accomplished was moving it. So this is where I really start to say is you can spend time creating standard details to where if one thing changes, the other thing moves, the other thing moves, the other thing moves. Problem with doing that is it's a lot like dealing with a family you're creating, is you've got to keep flexing and flexing and flexing that object, that detail, to make sure it's working. You know, maybe this isn't going to work dimensioned up here because if I dimension to this, it's going to pull this down, not keep it at that length. So depending on how it's set up, depending on what's going on, it may or may not work for you. But you can sometimes get a lot of it set up. Go to my door assembly. Yeah, so Well, this might not be the one I was looking for. So one of the ones that I had, and I thought I had a different detail inside this project, it must be an older one, that a lot of things you'll start to see me do when I get in there is if I start changing this out from a 2x4 or 2x6 to a 2x4 or something else, that a lot of times what I'll do is I might rotate this because I want it to change. I want it to line on the outside edge. So a lot of times I'll space bar it around to rotate it, and then I'll place it this way because now my insertion point's on the right-hand side. So if I am going to constrain it, I want it to grow from the right-hand side to the left, right? So if I take this and change it from a 2x4 to 2x6, it's growing to the left and right. So I'll do it this way. So now when I align and lock these two objects, as this gets changed from a 2x6 to a 2x4 to a 2x8, whatever, it's bringing that gypsum board along to the right. So that becomes one of the things when it's in there. You can't always control everything. You're not going to be able to get the insulation to update. You might not be able to get everything to move, but through dimensional constraints, going through some of these other things and nesting families, you might be able to get, a typical detail to update pretty quickly as it's said and done. Downside to this is let's go back and tag this gypsum board inside of here. We're going to do a tag in here, which it doesn't look like my gypsum board actually has a tag. I can't believe I don't have text on my gypsum board. That's pretty odd to me. I'm going to grab this. Let me edit the type. Yeah, type comment says, oh, probably because I have my rebar. So this is one thing that having multiple tags might mess you up on. Since I had last loaded family 6, which is my rebar tag, I don't have the parameters for the rebar in there. So I'm going to have to swap this tag out to be my normal left justified type comments and comments tag. So one thing on that is if you do load new families, what you might want to do is in your annotation tab, go to your loaded tags button and say, hey, if you are tagging detail items, don't be using my rebar tag, be using my normal tag. So now if I go back and do a tag by category, I'm not going to have to change it. It's using my normal tag. So little side note there. So I always love it when I screw something up. It always reminds me of a tip. So one thing that is downside on this, let's do say you come back and you change this 2x4 to a 2x6, right? You'll see, oh, I should probably have tagged that as well. So what you may have noticed when I did that is sure my tag updated, but look what happened to the other tag on the side. So as we all know, tags move with the elements in Revit. So a door tag moves with a door, a wall tag moves with a wall. Unfortunately, detail tags also move with the details. So this is one thing that I know a lot of my clients don't like. I wish there was a uncheck move with nearby element type scenario on these tags. Unfortunately, there isn't. So no matter what you do to constrain, padlock, make things move, etc., if they do change, you're going to be great in the fact that you're not going to be held liable for calling out something wrong. But what you might possibly lose is the fact that these tags then start moving all over the place. So just be aware of that. To me, this is the lesser of the two evils. A tag not lined up bothers me because I don't like the fact that the things are moving, but I also know that's not a liability issue. It's just more of an OCD issue. So for me, that's kind of one of the big things when we're dealing with this inside of here is the fact that, yes, my tags are intelligent, everything's going to update, but unfortunately, since it's not just a dumb piece of text, they're going to move with the objects. So yeah, a lot of times you can come through here, grab this tag, drag them both, get them to line up. If you drag them that way, by just the drag over here, notice how my leader arrowhead moved. So that's the even more drag part is pretty much you're usually dragging it by the move grip that pops up. So you can line them up. But then you might have to adjust your elbow. So you're either way going to be doing a double move. So that's kind of one of the things I always like to point out when you get inside of her.
Brian, Rachel has a question here. She says it's a little off topic, and she profusely apologizes and says she's sorry. But could you tell us how you made the orange reference lines to align your text?
We're not actually aligning the text. These orange reference lines here are just kind of a reference for me to eyeball where I think it needs to go to. What I've built with some clients in is if you, let's see if I can do it with this one. Yeah, so see how this one is now snapping to the other one? So what you can do actually, which is a little bit more efficient than these orange lines, the orange line is just kind of me knowing it's about how far they should be across. But you'll see that if I grab this 2x6 wood, I'm going to get rid of the elbow real quick. Or not. Let's go there. Come on, elbow, go away. There we go. That if I take this and move it, you will get this little green snap line. It is snapping those the correct distance apart. If you're only worried about know that these are pretty much always going to be single line tags, then just put the text in the label. It's not a big deal. But if you know that these might get larger, what you can actually do, and I don't know if this family has it or not, it doesn't, but what you can actually do is draw an invisible line in there, and we'll start snapping to the extent of the family. So if you want them this close, you'll see Revit will help me line them up that close, and I don't need these little orange dashed lines. But if one of those now switches to 2 lines of text, it's like, it's not really going to work for me. So I usually add an invisible line on this object, so as I move it up, it gives me a larger gap snap rather than right next to each other like that. So that's one tip in your tag family, and I'll do it with the little rebar one we have open. So in your rebar tag family, and this is where it becomes a little bit weird, go ahead and draw a line and make that line invisible. And what's going to be critical about this is you're actually 1/8 of an inch down, so I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch up, that you are centered. So this line does need to be centered on this reference plane. And then as much as you can eyeball that text to be lined up centered as well. So usually that means for me a whole lot of zooming in, usually going into thin lines, but a whole lot of zooming in just to see if that dot is there. And now with that said, if I reload this into my project, and when I drag, I think this is my family 6. Which one is my family 6? One of these, this one. No? Did I delete? Oh, I deleted my family. Well, let me change this to be my family 6. So now when I drag this one up and down, you're going to see it snaps farther away because it's actually snapping to the extent of that invisible line. So if you put that invisible line, and we'll switch this one to be family 6 as well, this is going to tremendously help you in the lining up of your text. Try that one more time. We'll pull it way up here. So I'll pull it down. I don't know if you can see that line. It's kind of weird. Sometimes you see the line, sometimes you don't. But you can kind of see it jump into position there. It's like, bam. So that's where it lines up. So that, to me, is better than the orange lines. The orange lines I can't actually snap to. This is more of a visual state. I also like the invisible line in there because that invisible line does give me a little bit more of a reference and then just eyeballing it to try to get that invisible line when it's selected lined up with that. So it just depends, you know, makes it a little bit easier to get that original insertion lined up. And then I can just start saying, hey, you go there, et cetera, et cetera. I like the invisible line theory. Other than that, this I believe I did cover in my annotating detailing session 1. If not, I do have this family on my blog, so you can go download it on my blog. And yes, you're welcome, Adam, for the holy cow. That invisible line is awesome. It helps me line standards up. But the orange box here, this is a nested generic, or not a nested, this is a generic annotation family. And the reason it's a generic annotation family is it will then scale appropriately. So if I open this up, you're going to see it's a little bit parameterized slightly. But this is a family that I can actually set for how big my sheet is. So if you've seen this in detailing 1, I think it was, it might have been detailing 2, that this is completely parametric. I can put where I want it to be. These are all arrayed little lines for how far you want that spacing to be. But what's nice about this family is if my detail doesn't fit in here, I can go say, oh, I'm not going to do 4 columns by 3 rows. I'm going to do 4 columns by 2 rows. And I've just increased the size of that knowing this is the space I have. No, no, no. We're going to go back to 4 columns by 4 rows on this sheet, which looks like it should be down. My 4 columns by 4 rows, that's the amount of space I have. So for me, it's just a family. I use this on top of 2D stuff, on top of 3D stuff. That gives me that general, what size is it type scenario. So that family is on my blog. If you need to, if you wanted it, you can go get it. I absolutely recommend that everybody does that. The orange lines do print. So before you go print, you want to go to your edit type and basically say turn all those lines off. I do have border lines and grid lines because otherwise it is going to print for you. The reason it's light orange is one of the values that prints the least if you're in grayscale. At least one of the colors I found that doesn't print that well in grayscale. So, but yet still is visible in like yellow.
Rick, let's see. Rick, great webinar, and unfortunately missed the first 2 parts of the detailing webinar. Yes, they are, Rick, and thank you for leading us into saying that once again. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the CAD-1 YouTube site probably in the next couple free days. And parts 1 and 2 of Brian's Detailing in Revit, this year's version of Detailing in Revit webinars are on our CAD-1 YouTube page. You can find those by going to the CAD-1 website, CAD-1.com, and looking right there on the main page, you'll see archives, webinar archives. You can find those right there and then link to them. And Brian, do you have anything else to add before we close out the day?
I don't believe I do. Just our final thing. Thanks for watching this, or live or recorded. And like I said, if you do need my website to go ahead and get that object, feel free to go get it. Here's my email. Here's the CAD-1's website. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you want help setting this up, give one of us an email.
And one last thing, for all of those who are live, it'll sound funny on the recorded one, but nonetheless, Brian Juge and I will be conducting the part 2 of our ResCheck, ComCheck, and Revit Energy webinar next Tuesday, the 17th of December at 10 a.m.
Which will also be recorded. So if you are watching this on a recording, you can still go to the CAD-1 YouTube channel and listen to that recording right after this one. Because in case you didn't get enough of Stan's voice.
Irony's wild, isn't it? So anyway, thanks folks, and we will talk to you soon. Bye now.